It still feels surreal to say that Final Fantasy XVI is out in the wild. But here we are, almost a month after its unexpected announcement during the September 2020 PlayStation 5 showcase. In the aftermath, in the absence of any real information from Square Enix themselves, everyone was diving through the trailer to try and pick out any semblance of lore and clues as to what the wider narrative might pertain to. This uncovered numerous ties to past games within the franchise, and it has only served to heighten anticipation for the next wave of information, as this should divulge much more about our unnamed protagonist, his role in proceedings, and whether or not there will be other protagonists who will join him on what will no doubt be an epic quest. Within our own trailer analysis video, we went quite granular. It saw us pick out multiple references to Final Fantasy XIV, something which was to be expected given it's being helmed by some of the most senior staff members from their project, but we also dove into the histories of those staff members. Thanks to the integration of the crystals and dominance, we also unpicked potential references to the Fabula Nova Crystallis mythology via Final Fantasy Type 0 and Final Fantasy XV. But even though what we pulled together was quite extensive, now that we've had a bit more time to dissect the trailer even further, it's become apparent that the connection between Final Fantasy XVI and other properties within the Final Fantasy franchise and beyond goes a bit deeper. But before we dive into that, here's a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, Crunchyroll. If you sign up for a free 14-day trial of Crunchyroll Premium, you will gain access to unlimited, ad-free 1080p anime, but you'll also gain access to top-tier shows like Dragon Quest: The Adventure of Dai via simulcast. This allows you to watch the latest episode 1 hour after it airs in Japan. Via the new premium membership tiers, you will also gain access to digital manga, offline viewing, and streaming on 4 different devices concurrently. If you're interested, sign up at crunchyroll.com/ffunion or click the link in the description below. That's crunchyroll.com/ffunion. Now, we don't know for certain, but it's assumed that Naoki Yoshida, in addition to being the producer on Final Fantasy XVI, will have been one of the initial creative forces behind the project's inception. In that regard, he will have no doubt had ideas brewing for some time, and 3 of the projects from which he is likely to have drawn inspiration released back in 1995, 1997, and 2000. Yoshida joined the video game industry in 1993 as a wide-eyed 20-year-old. But 2 years later, he played a game that would have a profound impact on him, Tactics Ogre. This was the brainchild of Yasumi Matsuno, who at the time was working at Quest. Matsuno then joined Square, where he created Final Fantasy Tactics alongside Hiroyuki Ito and Vagrant Story. Yoshida was so impressed by these works that he decided to push himself as a creator. He wanted to build his career in the gaming industry so that his reputation might one day allow him to work alongside Matsuno on a project. It saw him work on scenarios for the popular RPG series called Tengai Makyo, as well as serving as the story director on Bomberman 64: The Second Attack. And in 2004, Yoshida was able to take one step closer to realizing his dream after his application to join Square Enix was successful. But even though it meant he was now within the same company as Matsuno, the stars did not align. Due to friction and ill health, Matsuno left Square Enix right when Yoshida joined. That would have no doubt been very disappointing, but Yoshida held on to his dream, and 12 years later he was able to finally realize it as Matsuno worked alongside him on the Return to Ivalice campaign that featured in Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood. Now, I appreciate that this is a pretty big tangent, but it's an important one due to the connection, as outside of Yoshida's interest, the development staff responsible for the recovery of Final Fantasy XIV has also been rich with people who are part of building out Ivalice. Hiroshi Minagawa, who is now Final Fantasy XIV's art director, fulfilled a similar role on every one of Matsuno's projects and even served as a director on Final Fantasy XII. Akihiko Yoshida, who is now Final Fantasy XIV's main character designer, also fulfilled a similar role with every one of Matsuno's projects, and Kazutoyo Maehiro, who we mentioned in our last video, was also a key staff member on Tactics, Vagrant Story, Tactics Advance, and Final Fantasy XII. Knowing this, it feels a bit remiss that one of the things we didn't highlight that much in the initial video were the clear references to the Tactics games and the wider Ivalice mythology. The first of which was Joshua. We were introduced to numerous characters within the initial Final Fantasy XVI trailer, but the only one who was given a name was Joshua. Based on the dialogue we hear and how the selected scenes play out, we know that Joshua is the Archduke's son. It's also assumed that he is the dominant of the Phoenix icon and that he either is Ifrit or has some kind of connection with Ifrit. But there's also an allusion with a character who appeared within Vagrant Story. Joshua Corrine Bordoba was the second son of Duke Aldous Byron Bordoba, an influential figure within the game's world, and he had a similar visual look to the Joshua we've seen within Final Fantasy XVI. In that narrative, the Duke, believing his soul was connected to his son's, used whatever power and influence he wielded to ensure no harm should ever befall him, lest he himself suffer. And after an incident at his home, which saw the Duke order that his entire family be killed to cover it up, he shocked his peers by requesting that Joshua be the only family member spared. This then saw Joshua placed under the watchful eye of John Harden, a decorated soldier with whom he struck up a close bond. Based on a proposal that Matsuno released earlier this year that was translated by Heinsphere on Twitter, we also learned that Joshua was planned to play a central role in a sequel to Vagrant Story that was never made, although the outline does seem quite similar to the story of Crimson Shroud, a game released by Matsuno back in 2012 while he was working with Level 5. Final Fantasy XVI Joshua also appears to have a symbol on his collar that resembles the Bloodsin tattoo. This was a prominent plot device within Vagrant Story and was referenced in Final Fantasy XII and Final Fantasy Tactics A2. There also appears to be a similarity between Inquisitor Heldrick from Vagrant Story and the woman who appeared during the scene where there seems to be a big disagreement about an alliance. Outside of the aesthetic having a resemblance, they were both smoking some kind of tobacco, with the woman in 16 using what appears to be a kiseru. If we're sticking with that lady, then there seem to be some other points of interest too, namely the finer parts of her design. Upon closer inspection, she appears to have a tattoo on the ring finger on her right hand, and her attire is also very feather-based. It feels as though she could be the leader of a nation that's part of the alliance we hear about, or at least someone who's very senior, and based on those loose details, this nation could be connected to Garuda. She may even be the dominant for that icon, or aligned with a sect, similar to what we saw at the start of the trailer. Then again, she also has orange fingernails, and from what we saw, that colour is associated with Titan, so there's a case for either. Sticking on the subject of potential dominance, it's possible that the girl we saw alongside Joshua is Shiva's dominant, as she has very contrasting colours. Instead of the red and white, her clothing and jewellery is white with shades of grey, blue and teal. It was also nice to see the appearance of a white chocobo, quite the rarity. White chocobos have featured in a few games, but one of the more prominent appearances was within Final Fantasy XII. Here they were much more common than normal, and there was even an elite Marg called the Trickster. In addition to these details, snippets have also been pulled out of the Japanese trailer, which featured different dialogue, and I'd like to give a shout out here to Birds of Play for their breakdown. One of the more interesting insights related to the relationship between Joshua and the individual who we believe is the main character. We know one is tasked with protecting the other, but when Ifrit is going postal at the end of the trailer, there is a subtle difference in the dialogue, as the voice we hear shouts, "Stop! Please stop! It's my little brother!" This implies that there's a sibling relationship between the main character and Joshua, but it may not be straightforward, and the main character could be similar to what we saw with Ramza in Final Fantasy Tactics, or even Delita. By using the Japanese trailer, we can also deduce that the nation referred to as being the Empire in the English trailer is something more akin to the Zambrek Empire. After the Dragoon is defeated, in the Japanese trailer they refer to him as a damned Zabrek, as opposed to an Imperial Viper. Towards the end, after Phoenix has been summoned and Ifrit appears, the messaging in the Japanese trailer then differs quite a lot compared to its meaning in the English trailer. Instead of saying, "The legacy of the crystals has shaped our history for long enough," it says, "This is the divine protection of the crystal and the story of severing those ties." This could imply that Ifrit has appeared as the last line of defense for the crystal, as it looks to protect itself from those who would look to destroy the crystals and remove humanity's reliance on them. This could then point to the story being somewhat derivative of previous games that are about restoring and protecting the crystals, but that all depends on which side of history the protagonist lies. Yoshida promised soon after the release of the trailer that the next major information dump wouldn't happen until 2021, but during a segment at the Tokyo Game Show, he noted that a Final Fantasy XVI teaser website will be launched within a month, and that it will contain fresh information relating to the game's world and characters. Yoshida also took some time during the segment to respond to the comments geared towards the visuals that were shown off during the reveal trailer. He noted that the team didn't want to take the classic approach of doing a really cool but unrealistic pre-rendered trailer before then showing off the logo. And one of the main reasons was that he was conscious of wanting to avoid comments like "see you again in 2035", which have often accompanied Square Enix's reveals due to their poor track record of announcing games way too early. Instead, Yoshida wanted to show people that Final Fantasy XVI is a real, tangible product that's much further along in its development than people realized. But he also noted that right now they haven't done any optimization or tuning, and they didn't actually show any of the game's selling points yet. Those selling points will hopefully surface next year once more starts to be revealed, and who knows, based on the effort they've shown, it could mean the game does release much sooner than is thought. This was something asserted by Jason Schreier, who was talking about the game's development on his Triple Click podcast. He noted that the game has been in some sort of development for about 4 years now, which would position its conception as back in 2016, just before the release of Final Fantasy XV. At the time, it would have only been a few people working on the concept. Their main objective would have been preparing a proposal for the senior management team at Square Enix. But after it was given the green light to become Final Fantasy XVI, this timeline would align with prominent Final Fantasy XIV staffers like Takai, Mahiro, and Keiji Sudo vacating their positions on the development staff right after the release of Stormblood. Thanks to the Business Division 3 recruitment page, it's also clear that hiring was ramped up for the project during 2018 and 2019. It has also just been updated and now has the following statement: "We have already completed basic development and scenario production and are continuing to create large-scale resources and build boss battles while expanding our various development tools." This firmly suggests that they are a good way along with the project. When we polled fans on Twitter, 58% said they would be expecting to see Final Fantasy XVI release at some point during 2022, and that is feasible. Square Enix often likes to have around 6 to 9 months to do a proper promotional run before the release of their games. In recent times, we saw this with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which had its re-revealed teaser trailer air in May 2019 before the big media blowout a month later at E3. The game was then planned to release 9 months after E3 before it was slightly delayed. For now though, we just have to wait and see what happens and keep our eyes peeled for new information. Be sure to let us know in the comments what you thought about these new tidbits, and if you enjoyed the breakdown, then please do hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, remember to sign up for Crunchyroll Premium for free at crunchyroll.com/FFunion. Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. A big thanks to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, and of course, a big thanks to all of you for watching this video. I hope to see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.